Hey everybody, welcome back to my book chat channel. So this is another book review, and I've decided I'm going to change up the format in which I do things just a little bit, just to make things a little simpler for me. I didn't post a video up last week, things just got really busy, and I didn't quite get to it, so this is the one for this week. I'm doing a book review on Jane Eyre, and I figured while I was talking about the book, there would be a small art clip going on in the background of me painting something. So this one will be of a forest scene that I'm currently working on, and this is sort of how I think I will do things from now on. Okay, so I'm going to run through the synopsis and then go from there. So, Jane Eyre. I'm going to butcher this name, but by Charlotte Bronte, I think. We'll go with that. I will throw up a picture of the front cover of the book just so you can see which one I'm referring to, and I will list the book title and author down below in the description as well, just in case you are interested in checking it out. Okay, so the synopsis. Orphaned as a child, Jane has felt an outcast her whole young life. Her courage is tested once again when she arrives at Thornfield Hall, where she has been hired by the brooding, proud Edward Rochester to care for his ward, Adele. Jane finds herself drawn to his troubled yet kind spirit. She falls in love hard. But there is a terrifying secret inside the gloomy, forbidding Thornfield Hall. Is Rochester hiding from Jane? Will Jane be left heartbroken and exiled once again? So, a rather short synopsis, but this book, without going into too much and spoiling it, this book goes through a lot of detail. I can say, in comparison to a lot of the stories that I've read in the past, they usually just pick a time frame of a character and kind of roll with that. They don't necessarily cover the entire lifespan of a character. So what I mean by that is most books that I read, Nora Roberts, for example, a lot of her romance books, they usually pick up in the middle of, their adult life. They might glance back at their youth, and every once in a while their childhood, they might reference it, but they very rarely start out as telling the story of the person's childhood and then growing into their middle years and then their youth or their adult years and then what happens to them in the end. I find very few books that I've read up to this point do that. And I was rather fascinated by how that was done in this book. Now, I read this through audiobook, so I don't know how it differs from the physical copy, but I really liked how the audiobook was done. In that, every once in a while, the way it was narrated, it was done so that it felt like the narrator was talking directly to you. Every once in a while, she would make a line or say a line along the lines of, so readers, this is what I did, or, you think this is what's going to happen, but this happened. And they wouldn't just implement that or indicate it, they would actually say things like that, which for me, it drew me into the story even more because it made me feel like I was actually a part of all of it. So with Jane Eyre, definitely a complicated story. Definitely set in an older fashioned setting where while women were starting to slowly gain their feet and, find jobs for themselves, it was still a new thing where men were still sort of, kings of their castle, and women were not quite out from their shadow just yet. So, but this tells of the story, Jane Eyre, who was brought up in maybe not in the greatest environment. She had a wild imagination, and mixed with very hard biblical environments, it didn't quite mesh. And I find that I don't read a lot of stories that are hard into the biblical aspect of things, but this story had a lot of that as well. And it goes from, like I said, her childhood and how she had to face caretakers who weren't really interested in her, to eventually going off to school and finding herself there, developing friendships and creating bonds of her own, and learning to survive on her own. So, creating a persona for herself. And then it kind of jumps forward into more present life where she becomes a teacher. Try not to give too much away, but some of these little details I think are forgivable. So she becomes a teacher, where she was educated herself, and she spends time there. And then she jumps forward, as the synopsis said. She arrives at Thornfield Hall, where she takes a job as a governess. And governesses don't actually have a big or a very positive reputation in this story. And there's a lot of mystery and a lot of I think we'll just stick with mystery. There's a lot of mystery that goes on within the home, and the adventures that take place and events that take place. It definitely creates a lot of interest and a lot of intrigue. And then it jumps into a lot of futuristic type situations. But honestly, I can say through my own personal opinion, that while I enjoyed the story, there was definitely a lot of parts of it that I didn't enjoy. I can say that for all of the female casts, all the different characters, I liked, I'd say 95% of all of them. The men, however, I couldn't stand them. Even the love interest, Edward Brochester, I really didn't like him at all. I feel like he made a lot of mistakes, and while people make a lot of those mistakes, I couldn't stand the egotistical way that all these men thought and led their lives and went about doing things. It drove me absolutely batty. The one thing I can say too, that in regards to Jane herself, as I can't say that, I don't know, I didn't mind her. She wasn't necessarily a favorite character, but I didn't mind her. But the one thing that I can definitely say that I respect of her out of everything that you listen to and that she goes through is the fact that she was very determined to make a life for herself and to better herself. And not only that, but while I'm not a big religious person, I can respect the fact that she was, and she didn't allow, although she had a lot of temptation, she didn't allow the men and the decisions and the circumstances that surrounded her to influence her beliefs. She really stuck to her morals and things, and if she honestly believed that making one decision versus another would leave her in a bad situation where God would frown upon it, she would refuse to go down that path. And there are a few instances in the story that they really go into detail with that, where there's a lot of back and forth and pros and cons, and she's faced with a couple of different situations where she really has to decide her own decision versus her moral decision. And I can absolutely say I respect the fact that she stuck to her morals despite the temptation around her, and that she didn't give in despite all odds saying that she would. So again, while I'm not a big religious person, I can honestly respect those who do live their life that way. They walk and talk the same. They don't, they follow what they preach, whereas a lot of people don't. So I definitely respect those who do, and that was something that really made me release respect to Jane. Overall, it wasn't a bad read. I did find it kind of slow and a little boring in places, but overall it had a fairly level consistency in the story, so it didn't necessarily pick up, but it didn't necessarily slow down either. Sorry, I have my kids in the background. So it was a fairly steady read. Yeah, so that was kind of my thoughts and feelings on this book. I'd love to know what you thought of this. Have you read this book before? Are you planning on reading it? If you have read it before, what did you think of Jane and Mr. Rochester and all the characters involved? I'd love to know what you thought. Thank you all again for checking in. I will post another video again next week, and this will be in a similar format. I thank you all so much for supporting my channel up until this point, and I will see you all again in the next video. Happy reading!